All right, so lesson 9.8, we are going to work on completing the square. The goal of our lesson, we're actually going to be able to solve quadratic equations by using this method called completing the square that we're going to talk about in this intro video. So completing the square, what I have are some examples right here. You can see that look similar to the quadratic functions and equations we've been working with. What we're missing is that c value. So we're missing a term right here, but you have your ax squared and your bx, and we're trying to put a number here in the blank spot that's going to give us a perfect square trinomial. Now, a perfect square trinomial is something that we are going to be able to factor. So that is our goal, something that we can factor. Now, if you think about, let's say I'm just going to put a random number in, so use a pencil if you're going to write this down with me. Let's say I put a 2 right there. So then we'd say, well, can we factor this trinomial? Are there factors of 2, our c value, that add up to 6, our b value? So we'd think about it and we'd say, all right, our factors of 2 are 1 and 2, and do 1 and 2 add up to a 6? And they do not, so that would tell me that this is not factorable. So our goal is, now we're going to erase this. Oh gosh, if I can't erase it. Okay, there we go. So our goal is to put a c value here that is factorable, factors of this term that add up to this term. So there is a specific way that we're going to find this every single time. We're going to take our b value and we are going to divide it by 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. Now we're not going to use a 3 because if we put a 3 right here, there are not factors of 3 that add up to 6. But all we have to do to this 3 is we're going to square it. And that's what's going to go right there. So 3 squared is 9. What we just created is what we call a perfect square trinomial. Now if you think about factoring this, are there factors of 9 that add up to 6? And our factors of 9 that add up to 6 are 3 and 3. So you would say, all right, well that factors into an x plus 3, x plus 3. And then you'd say, oh, look at that, I have the same factors twice, so I can just say x plus 3 squared. So that little trick that we did, we took our b value, divided it by 2, took that answer and squared it. That's always what's going to go for our c value, and it's going to give us that perfect square trinomial. So let's try that again and see if we can get the next one to work out. So we have x squared plus 10x plus a c value that we're going to come up with. So again, to get a perfect square trinomial that's going to factor into this every time, we're just going to take our b value, we're going to divide it by 2, and we get 5, and then all we have to do with that 5 is square it, and that's the number that's going to go there. And by the way, one thing to think about is we are squaring a number. Whether this number is positive or negative, it will always be positive after squaring. So we're always going to have a plus our c value. Now, did we just create something that we can factor? Are there factors of 25 that add up to 10? You guys would say, well, yeah, 5 and 5. And look at this, we get that same factor pair again. So we're just going to say x plus 5 squared. So completing the square is when we are filling in our c value. We have completed this and given ourselves a perfect square trinomial. The reason why we want that is our goal is to end up with this down here. That's going to help us to solve our quadratic equations, which you guys will see in the next video. So let's just keep practicing this so we get this idea down. All right, so we have to fill in our c value. We take our b value. This time our b value is a negative 12. That's okay. You're still going to divide it by 2. We get negative 6. And then you're going to square it. Remember, that's always going to give you a positive answer. And we get positive, there we go, 36. So we've completed the square, but remember that is factorable. So what are factors of 36 that add up to a negative 12? And that's going to be x minus 6, oops, x minus 6. And so we can write it just as an x minus 6 squared. So I hope you guys are noticing some patterns in what we're doing. That just makes us a little bit easier when we start to recognize that. Next example, we have to complete the square. So you take your b value, you divide it by 2, we get a negative 10, and then we have to square it. We get a positive 100. If it will let me write it, there we go, 100. Now this factors. Now, did you guys notice at all that when you take your b over 2 and you square it, this number right here is always the number that ends up inside your parentheses? And I know I'm going to have 2 of them, so I'm just going to go ahead and put a squared. But did you guys notice that yet? Look at this. When we did our b over 2, and we got negative 6, see how the negative 6 ended up down here? That's going to happen every single time. Look, it happened right here too. We did our b over 2, we got 3. Here's a positive 3. b over 2, we got a 5. There's a positive 5. So what's so great about math is patterns emerge all the time. So when you recognize patterns, then you can use those patterns to make math a little bit easier for yourself. Another pattern that we did with the first 4 examples is, did you guys notice that your b value was always even? Well, those are nice, a little bit easier, but they're not always going to be even. So let's say your b value is a 5. You're still going to do the exact same process. You're going to take your b value, divide it by 2. Well, 5 over 2 doesn't reduce, so that's just 5 over 2. We're going to square it. Now remember, when you square a 5 over 2, you square the top number and you get 25. And you square the bottom number and you get a 4. So we just completed the square. Even though we got this really weird looking c value, this is a perfect square trinomial. There are factors of c that add up to b. Now we can remember the patterns we've noticed already and say, well, I know that when you take your b over 2, this 5 over 2 is what goes right in here. And I just factored it. This factors into this. So again, we're just using the patterns we've noticed to make this a little bit easier when your b value is odd. So you take your b value, divide it by 2. It doesn't divide evenly, so that's our b over 2. We are going to square that. That's what goes up here when we complete the square. That just means you square the top number, you square the bottom number, so we are going to have an 81 over a 4. This factors, what are factors of 81 over 4 that add up to negative 9? Sounds really hard, right? But we already noticed the pattern, you guys. We already know that it's going to be this negative 9/2. Because that's negative, we are going to say x minus 9 over 2 and then squared. All right, in the next few videos, we're going to see how to take this completing the square into an equation so we can actually solve for x.